Hello readers, I'm David Reader, and today we're reviewing Fall of Giants, written by Ken Follett in 2010. So this is an epic historical fiction World War I story, and it takes place between 1911 and 1924, with special focus on the World War I years, so 1914 to 1918 or so. And this is the second Ken Follett book that I have read. The first one I read was much shorter. This is a very long read. It's over 900 pages and it's split up into 3 parts. The prologue, and the first part is the months before World War I, the second part is World War I, and the third part is the years after World War I. And throughout this book you follow the stories of different nationalities, so you get the perspective of 2 people from Wales, 2 people from England, 1 person from Germany, 1 person from the United States, and 2 people from Russia. Before I get into the story itself, I'll talk about the characters. First of all, you have Billy Williams, and this is who the prologue is about. So he's a teenager when this book starts out, and we see him becoming an adult in this novel. The prologue is about him starting his first day as a miner in Wales. This is in 1911 and he's 13 here. And while he's down in the mines, in the darkness, alone, on his first day, he thinks that he's seen Jesus, so he's called Billy Jesus. Then you have his sister, Ethel, who's a few years older than him, so she's a young woman. She works at the Fitzherbert estate, which is a mansion owned by English aristocrats. And she goes up in the ranks quite quickly, so she becomes the principal housemaid of the house. And in this story, she also has an affair with the Earl of the house, Fitzherbert. Fitzherbert is known as Fitz for short. An aristocrat, he also serves in the House of Lords, and he also knows a lot of important British politicians. We get to see a lot of the British elite visiting his house. Then you have his sister, Lady Maud, who's a feminist and is quite opinionated, and she's having a secret relationship kind of with a guy called Walter von Ulrich, who's a German liberal, so he's much more progressive than the old conservative types of Prussian Germany. Maud and Walter are having a relationship behind the backs of everyone, basically. Then you have the 2 Russian brothers. So you have Grigory Peshkov, who's a factory worker. He's an honest guy in Russia, oddly enough, and he's suffered under the Tsar regime. So his father has been hanged by the Tsar, and his mother was killed in the 1905 failed revolution protests. And then you have his dishonest younger brother, Lev Peshkov, and he does some illegal stuff on the side, and that gets Grigory in trouble, although Lev has more success with the girls than Grigory does. So those are the characters. Let me get into the story. So I've already mentioned what the prologue is about, so I'll start with part 1. In part 1, you have this love affair between Ethel and Fitz. Ethel ends up getting pregnant. Fitz also gets his own wife, Bia, who's a Russian princess, pregnant. So Fitz wants to get rid of Ethel. So they make an arrangement that Ethel is going to go live in a house in London, and she's gonna go work on her own. So she's basically fired from the Fitzherbert household. And of course the wife of Fitzherbert knows nothing about this affair. She is very happy when her child is born. And that Ethel got pregnant like this makes her an outcast of her family. So she has to go to London, she cannot stay with her family. And her younger brother, Billy Williams, stands up to her, to his father. So he basically decides, okay, I'm not gonna live here anymore, and he goes and joins the army. Then as war is approaching, you have Maud and Walter, who really love each other, who decide, okay, let's get married in secret. And you have the father of Walter who tries to convince Maud to abandon this idea, but it fails and they end up getting married in secret. And their 2 witnesses are Ethel Williams, so the former housemaid, and also the cousin of Walter, who's called Robert, who's an Austrian, not a German. And that guy is gay, by the way. And you have people who are trying to de-escalate the war, but this fails. So the great powers go to war with each other. Just before that, you have Lev Peshkov, who gets into an altercation with the police, with 1 dead policeman. And Grigory Peshkov has been saving up money to go to America. He's gotten himself a ticket for this. His younger brother, Lev, basically convinces him to give his ticket to him. And Grigory, the bleeding heart which he is, says yeah, and Lev goes off supposedly to America, but he actually stops in Britain since they get scammed by the Vyalov gangsters in America. So Grigory is stuck in Russia. The girlfriend that Lev had, he got her pregnant, so now Grigory has to take care of that kid. When World War I comes around, they get married so she can get the money of Grigory. Initially, I feel really bad for Grigory in this book. But Grigory becomes a stronger character throughout this book. He starts out a bit weak, but becomes stronger later. So then let's move on to part 2, which is World War I. Here you get some warfare scenes. And I can say, so the warfare scenes, they're decent. But I've read a lot of Harry Turtlelove and I prefer his warfare scenes a lot more. During this time, you have the USA under Woodrow Wilson maintaining neutrality initially, but the relations between America and Germany are becoming worse and worse. They had some problems in Mexico just prior to World War One. Germany does a couple things that really angers the Americans. One, they sink the Lusitania ship, which had arms that were being sent to Britain, but they also had American citizens. So that angers the American public. Then you have Germany, who proposes an alliance with Mexico and encourages Mexico to retake the territory they lost from the United States, and also wants to get Japan to attack the USA. Yeah, America under Wilson is angry, so the public want war. Wilson decides, okay, we're gonna go to war. You get this perspective of Wilson, how he acts, from Gus Dewar, who is his aide. Yeah, I hate Woodrow Wilson, and he's portrayed as a good guy, kind of, in this book, although it's briefly mentioned the reasons why he's a horrible guy. But during the war, you have the Germans who are beating the Russians quite bad. You've had previously Gregory, who's been a Russian soldier, conscripted. He has had a simple strategy. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep my squad out of trouble, to not get them killed meaninglessly by the Germans. And to prevent his soldiers getting killed, he has to shoot one of his officers. But eventually they're called back to the capital. I think it's St. Petersburg, I'm not sure. It's called Petrograd now. And you have a Russian revolution that slowly builds up over a few days. So the soldiers are ordered to shoot on the crowd. They refuse, they end up shooting on their officers and the police instead. Basically, the Tsar is overthrown, he abdicates. The guy he gives the throne to, he also is forced to decline the offer of the Russian throne. So now Russia is a republic under the provisional government of Kerensky, I think. Kerensky decides, we're gonna continue the war. So people are not happy that things are not really changing that much. They want peace, land and bread. This takes place during the months of 1917. We've had the USA declare war on Germany, but it takes a year for them to build up a lot of troops. But eventually you have the Bolsheviks who decide, okay, we're gonna overthrow Kerensky in a coup. And Kerensky basically puts up no resistance and flees. And the representatives in the, whatever the representative body of Russia is called, the people who are not Bolsheviks disagree over this. So you have the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries who basically leave the legislature. So now the Bolsheviks have a monopoly and legitimize the revolution. So now they are setting up their dictatorship of the proletariat under Lenin. You actually have a part in this story where Walter, under the Germans, is helping Lenin and revolutionaries to return from exile in Switzerland and go to Russia. And the Germans are actually giving money to Lenin. And then a few months later, you have the Brest-Litovsk treaty, which basically has the Russians surrendering to the Germans, and the Germans get a lot of stuff from the Russians. So the war between Russia and Germany is over, but now you have a Russian civil war between the Reds and the Whites. The problem is the Whites are not that serious fighters. So the British are trying to back them covertly. We have Winston Churchill as the war minister. Lord George has replaced Asquith as prime minister, I think in 1915-16, something like that. They're trying to send help secretly to Russia to back up the Admiral Kolchak, who soon becomes head of the White Army. But the White Army fail, the Brits are forced to leave, and the Reds win the Civil War. And this happens in part because you have Billy Williams, who's been a soldier. He was sent to Siberia to fight, and he's basically communicated in code with his sister Ethel, who Lady Maud has had her become the editor of a left-wing journal, and they reveal the secret British war in Russia. So Billy Williams is court-martialed, he's sentenced to prison, but he's released within a year or two. And after the Americans come, the Germans are trying to do one final push. Eventually they realize it will not work, so they have to surrender. And then in part 3, which is after the war, you have the Versailles Peace Conference. You have Woodrow Wilson here negotiating with the other leaders of Italy, Japan, France and Britain. They decide that they're not gonna use Wilson's 14 points as a treaty, and instead they're gonna punish Germany. Now in this book it's portrayed as excessive, that the Germans get a war guilt clause, that they have to pay reparations, that they lose territory. This book subscribes to some myths about the Versailles Treaty and how harsh it actually was. Towards the end of the book we get to see the brutality of the Soviets, and that they arrest the guy for going to a Menshevik meeting to elect someone to Soviets, and Grigory, who's become a high-ranking revolutionary, he has to intervene to prevent to have his friend Konstantin executed. And you can also see that the commissars are living like the aristocracy. So Grigory's lifestyle has gone up a lot. And he starts to understand this is not normal. And in Britain, you've had the Williamses running for British Parliament. Throughout this book, you have the fight for the women to get the right to vote. So eventually they kind of get it. And Ethel and Billy Williams get elected to the British Parliament as Labour MPs. And back in the States, you have Woodrow Wilson, who tries to convince the people to sign on to the League of Nations, but then he gets sick, so that fails and the Senate rejects it. Since when Wilson went to Versailles, he did not bring any Republicans with him. Wilson in this book is described as an idealist. He's not that pragmatic of a politician. And after this, you have the soldiers returning home. Solev Peshkov had gone to the USA. He married the daughter of some Russian gangster. He was sent off to World War I, then he returned. Then he had a fist fight with his father-in-law, which ended up killing him because he has a heart attack. You had prohibition that has been passed. He goes off to Canada quickly, then returns, convinces his wife, who he has cheated on, to say that this was not a murder but an accident. And Lev is basically planning to run a criminal enterprise of sending in booze from Canada to the USA. And then in Britain, you've had elections where Labour is winning big. They're the second party now. And the Liberals and Labour oust the Conservative from government, and the Liberals are no longer that big of a party. So a lot of things happen to these characters in this book. I've only mentioned some of them, but that's an overview of Fall of Giants. So how would I rate Fall of Giants by Ken Follett? I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. I preferred much more his book, The Man from St. Petersburg, than this. This book, my main problem with it is that there's a lot of raunchy romance in it. During the first part of the book, there's a sex scene every 20 pages. It doesn't stay as bad as this, but still, there's a lot of raunchy romance in this book. And a little bit of that is fine. Turtlelove does that every 50 or 100 pages. That's fine. Ken Follett does it a lot, and there's a lot of romance. It goes into detail about it from the guy's perspective, from the woman's perspective, and yeah, it's too much. I did not enjoy that part. Some of the relationship dynamics in this book I did not like. But the historical aspect of this book, I liked it a lot. So reading about the build-up to World War I was great. Reading about the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War was interesting. Reading about the World War itself, that was decent. I prefer Turtlelove takes on it, but still worth reading it. Basically, the perspective of this book is you get to see the perspective of labor workers and the aristocracy. You can see that both sides hate each other. So would I recommend you to read Fall of Giants? If you like historical fiction from World War I, then yes, I would definitely recommend it. It is a big book, 900 pages, but I enjoyed most of it. The prologue is not that fun, so it takes some time to get into it. But overall, it's a good, entertaining read. I did not like all the historical interpretations in this book, but overall, pretty good. I probably look forward to reading more of Ken Follett's books. Although I'll probably stick to his modern historical fiction books. I don't think I'm gonna read his medieval stuff. And if you like this World War I-esque book review from Ken Follett, then I would recommend you to check out my book review of The Man from St. Petersburg, also by Ken Follett. And this book is basically about a Russian assassin trying to kill a Russian prince to prevent World War I. Anyways, I'm the Arid Reader, and I will see you readers next time.